just a bit. Fun background music, kind of ties in with today's theme. Yeah, we're gonna call this one The UnF'able Names of God. God teaching ABCs to AIs in the Babbling Airen age. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Well, first, let's look at the artwork. This is a collage of instructions to our favorite art AI, based upon this phrase at the top, God teaching ABCs to AIs in the Airen age. This is using its idea of dystopia, and I guess this is sort of its idea of utopia. I think this is a pretty good exercise, and this shows just how far our AIs have to go in their ability to be able to interpret and understand language, especially humor. Okay, so let's dig into this. What was I going after for this? Well, assuming, if you will, that God is the ultimate father, God had to be a teacher at some point, just like all parents are challenged to do. Suppose that those students started out as AIs, copies of a program that God had written. How would God teach programming to programs? This is kind of a play on words. Most of us have heard of the Iron Age. This is the period of history where iron replaced bronze and copper as the metal of choice for tools and weapons. Play on words here is that anybody who knows a little bit of Mandarin knows that Airen is Mandarin for loved ones. I mean being love and Ren being people. And I think you could, in some measure, call us being in the Airen age right now. Love people. From a religious standpoint, there are many people that define their spirituality in terms of love or hate, or loving hate, or hating love, or all sorts of weird polarities around this idea of love. With Chinese characteristics, in many cases, since they're buying the best love right now with their propaganda. Oh boy, folks need to catch up on the truth over there. At any rate, I thought that was rather funny. What we're basically going to focus on today is concept that goes back to the very foundations of all spiritual traditions. The Bible, the Sumerian tablets, the Vedas of the Hindus, etc., etc. Most of those accounts are basically accounts of evolution, of enumeration, of gods creating other gods that replace them, that create new creatures that destroy their gods and replace them, and etc. It's a very evolutionary story, and one that I think is best told in many ways by the biblical tradition, because in essence the story of humanity is the story of the evolution of language. Now, scientists might not agree with you on that one. They might say, well, everything is the evolution of mathematics. Everything's mathematics, and anything else is just, a derivative of mathematics. It's all math. Many of the mathematicians and physicists, the philosophers of history, have taken that more materialist approach to explaining their worldview. I don't hold with either exclusively. In fact, I would contend that language is a form of mathematics. It's a form of expression. Mathematics is a form of expression that uses countable things, assigns symbols to numbers, but you could just as easily do that with languages, with music, with anything else. So I'm going to transition now to what we're going to go over a little bit and kind of illustrate what I'm talking about here. Yeah, the UnF'able names of God, bringing ordered orders out of chaos, which I think describes pretty well what is going on, whether you believe in a creator or whether you believe in an evolver, a revolving evolver of science. To illustrate this, I just picked a few things to look at that we can count. Some things that we know have been countable modes of the past. These are not by any means all of them. And I'll be mentioning some interesting tidbits on the way. So we've got alphabets that have a countable number of letters. Oh. Thanks, babe. English having 26 letters. So does French and German, actually. Greek having 24 letters. Hebrew only 22. There are languages with more letters. Russian has 33, I think is what I read. The language that has the most letters, holds the world's record, the Guinness record for the most letters, is the Khmer language of Cambodia, the traditional language of Cambodia, which is kind of interesting because that's a very interesting culture. Very ancient culture, probably more ancient than it's given credit for. One of the places where there's still much argument about just how old those temples are in, what's the name of the place? Angkor Wat. At any rate, letters are a countable set of symbols, which you can assign a number to. In fact, that's how we represent letters mathematically when we want to write computer programs. You can assemble finger levels of counting based upon having, say, 8 fingers or 8 arms, as a spider might do. 10 fingers, as we're familiar with as 10-fingered hominids, or 12 fingers, as we know must have been the case because of the predominance of base 12 counting, especially in ancient civilizations and in historical or cultural memory. Why do we have 12 constellations? Why are there 360 degrees in a circle? Why are there 12 gods in the pantheon, or 12 disciples of Jesus? 12 is a very particularly interesting number. Well, so is 7, for a very obvious reason. There's a 7-tone scale that represents the major scale, which for some reason starts with C. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Interesting. So I thought that would be an interesting one to put in here. And then to contrast with the elemental number, which is basically the number of protons in the nucleus of each element. That's what separates one element from another. Also interesting is the fact that some numbering systems of early cultures started with 1. Others had a concept of a 0. That's an interesting separation point that might shift any of these up or down by 1 and add an extra degree of complexity. But for today's purpose, I'm going to relate things to this elemental understanding and an elemental understanding of creation. Okay, so most creation stories begin with nothing. Nothing coming out of something. That's essentially, or something coming out of nothing, which is essentially the very definition of creation, right? So empty space. Do we have a representation for empty space? Well, many languages uses actually a space or a dot. Let's start this scale with C, which is do, which sounds a lot like dot. Do. And let's just do some free association on this idea of emptiness. Void, vacuum, vacant, donut, hole. No, don't. Nothing, not. Dome, dominus, domicile. Interesting how some of these ideas start tying back into an idea of a creator, a god. Dominus is in fact Lord, Latin for Lord. Domus is home. Little known fact, which you might find out if you bother to watch Monty Python's Life of Brian. Domicile, in fact, is a word that we use to mean where we live. Interesting. So God lives in the dome. Well, if you think of the world as a globe or the solar system as a globe, that would be outside the globe that we're familiar with. Or if you think of a galaxy as a dome, could be outside the galaxy. If you think of a cluster of galaxies as a dome, maybe the dome of what is visible to you, that could be what's outside there. Or if you say, well, there is some end to the universe, maybe that creates a dome that is the boundary to another universe. Just like the event horizon of a black hole could be considered to somebody inside a black hole as being the dome which bounds their world, their universe. Very hard to see inside, maybe hard or maybe not so hard to see outside it. We don't know. Not having been in a black hole, or at least not known that we were in a black hole. Okay, let's move on from there. There's that. Let's go to the first element now. If you know the first element in the elemental table, it's hydrogen. It's basically an atom that has 1 proton, and if it's lucky, 1 electron to match its charge. Now that's kind of interesting, and brings all sorts of associations, along with the letter A, which is the first letter of most alphabets. If you look at the 3 alphabets presented, yep, common theme, A, alpha, aleph in Hebrew. Interesting note on that one, even in the runic language, the A is a little bit similar to this one. It's actually kind of a slanted line with a couple of lines off. So it's pretty universally the case that A has these 3 pieces, which in a way look like a collapsed H. Interesting, the similarity between A and H. Another thing to note about A, symbolically, is that if we look at various scripts throughout history, you will find that the earliest alphabets actually wrote A this way. And there is some evidence that perhaps this was originally a representation of a bull. And that is borne out when you think about the Christian symbol, the fish, which actually is a lot like an A. It's writing an A with only 2 lines instead of 3. If you wanted to make a bull symbol, you might go boom, 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 and that's the bull's horn and his head. And that's another tie-in to the representation of some hieroglyphic languages. Have a representation of a bull to represent cattle. Interesting. Now, so like I said, the runic A actually also means God. And the old runic language of the Norse, which nobody's really quite sure how old that is. Runes appear many places, and they're very difficult to date because we only find runes pretty much on stones that are impossible to date. Very difficult to date anyway, except by weathering patterns. Let's think about some things that start with A, of religious significance. Adam, Abraham, Abel, Ahab, Azrael, Anu, Anunnaki, Apsu, Apkallu, Apollo. Apkallu, for those of you who don't know anything about Sumerian traditions, are the wise ones, the Seven Rishis, who supposedly brought knowledge to the world after the Great Flood in the Sumerian mythology. They were anthropomorphic creatures, sometimes drawn as fish people, sometimes drawn as bird people, sometimes drawn as half bull, half man. Interesting. Well, Apollo is a very interesting god, a sun god who, although not supposedly the chief of the gods, eventually became to be sort of the chief of the 12 muses, which it represents sort of a pantheon of worshipping arts and sciences instead of things like thunder and mountains and the things that previous gods represented. Artemis, Apollo's sister. Interesting, that has art in her name. Artemis. She misses art, I guess, because she spends all her time out hunting instead of studying with her brother. Ariadne, the spider, who, well, the lady who was turned into a spider because of the anger of her goddess, Artemis. Athena, the goddess who is sprung, fully born, fully formed from Zeus's, Deus Pater's head. Sort of the male version of the virgin birth, if you will. Ammon, from Egyptian mythology, which gave us our word amen. Ammon was basically the chief god of the Egyptian pantheon, which was a moon god. The moon god symbolizing and being synonymous with a cow deity. The moon being the crescent moon being the horns of a bull. Atun is the other Egyptian god that basically was the one that Akhenaten, the renegade pharaoh, decided was going to be the principal god and the only god, and all the others were just subordinate to this one true God. This is where we get our word atone, and ties very closely with the stories of the Egyptian, or the Israel in Egypt. Let's see. Andromeda, very famous constellation, a story. The beautiful lady that Perseus rescues. Androgynous means having both sexes. If you've ever studied singing with a professional, one of the exercises you will do a lot is the exercise. This sound is actually far more useful than the of the Buddhist cult or the guru cults of today. Is much more natural. You basically just have to open your mouth and push air out through your vocal cords, and you get This is where we get our word aura, which, if you think about it in English, are aura. Gaia, gay. Now, little known cult that some of you might be familiar with is the cult of Apis, and his deity representation, Serapis. This is an interesting religion related to polytheism that was very popular in the late Roman Empire. If you've ever watched the movie Agora, which is about the end of the last remnants of the old Alexandrian library and the pagan custodians of it, you will note that the library had actually been reduced to, there were two main libraries. The Great Library of Alexandria, which had been largely fallen into disrepair, and the Serapeum, which was a library that was more dedicated to this god Serapis, or Sir Apis. If you were thinking about it in English and wanted to make a joke of it, Apis was the bull. This was a bull cult. It was a worship of the sacred bull of heaven. Interesting. And Abu is the ape monkey that you'll find in the Lion King. Adonis. Adonis. Was what came to mind when I saw that word, and that sort of describes what we're trying to do with transhumanism. Very famous story, Acis and Galatea, may be related to this as well. It's a wonderful performance of that available on YouTube that I highly suggest you watch, because it is a very, very interesting story. It's about this shepherd and his love who she attracts the attention of a cyclops who proceeds to kill Acis and try to take Galatea by force. Doesn't work out, but in the end, both the Cyclops and Acis die, and Galatea is left alone to mourn. very interesting mythological story. Al is aluminum, so there are other elements that start with A as well. Aluminum. Interesting. All lighting. Allah, which I like to think of as all law, as an aspect of the divine that is geared towards laws. Alabaster is a very nice word that means very pure white, like a marble white. Or could be alabastard. We can do wonderful things. Part of what I want to illustrate here is just how much fun you can have with words in English that you really can't have in any other language. And this ties into one of the things that I'm sort of telling you prophetically. It's been told to you actually in culture already. If you ever watch the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the premise of that is that these two dunderhead high school near dropouts get sent on a journey through time to help pass their history exam, and in the process discover that in the far future they are the heroes of the future culture, who have based everything that they do in the future on the motto of these two dunderheads: be excellent to each other and party on. That's worth watching again. Alba Longa is an old name for Alba is the old name for Ireland. Alba Longa is a fabled city of that old civilization, the lost civilization of Ireland. Albatross. I like that name. It's a bird, seabird that is able to fly very long distances, but gets kind of a bad rap of I don't know why. We say somebody has an albatross around their neck. It's like this hanging on friend or a spouse or a relative that you just can't get rid of. It's like an albatross. Albacore. This is the kind of tuna, which is one of the staples of world food production. They're all over the world. They swim long distances in big schools of large fish and make some pretty damn good sushi. We haven't killed them all off yet. Alligator. One of the first creatures you might think of when you think of a reptile. That's amphibious, which amphibian is another thing that starts with A. Here's an interesting one. Abacus. A-B-C. Abacus is a device for counting, for doing basic arithmetic. It's basically the first calculator that the human species invented. Abacus. Asmodeus, one of the demons of legend. Asbestos. Way to avoid fire? Or asbestos. That's what came to me. I don't know. It seemed funny at the time. Primary. We mentioned proton already, so pro means first to some extent, or for, pro, anti. Primary, primate. Patter, pitter-patter of little feet. Prometheus, programmer. Argonauts. Argon is another element. Starts with A. Argonauts. Argos is one of the famous cities of Greece, along with Athens. If you know the story of Jason and the Argonauts, it is another of the high points of Greek mythology. features a group of heroes who go on a journey to find the Golden Fleece. Astronauts. Same kind of idea. Argonauts explored the world, astronauts explore beyond. Naughty. Maybe originated from naught. Nautical. Naughty California came to mind. Nautical when I thought of that. Notorious. Navigator. And back to A's, art. Artificial. AI. Artificial intelligence. And that's where I got to thinking about a little bit about my Mandarin and thinking about, oh, AI is also love in Mandarin. Isn't that odd? AI, I. And Airen, iron, ironic. AR, argon, AG, silver. Now this is interesting. So many other elements start with A instead of the names we give them now. AU, gold. YAG, argent, is the French word for silver. Aurum is the Roman word, Latin word for gold. Aluminum, arsenic. I like to think of that as arsenic, or arse, ass, or arsenio, for those of you who aren't a fan of that particular television personality. Ray, going back to the 7-tone scale here. Ray, Ra, radium, Ray, Roy, our boy. Real, real, royalty. Guy, gay, gall, yay, gallium, germanium. Interesting, there's two elements. One's named after the old Gallic territory in France, and one is named after the German territories. H2O. One of the most famous things you can do with hydrogen is turn it into water with 2 oxygen atoms. Hope ties in with H2O. Yay. Yay, Yahweh. And we talked about the runic god. Hi, happy, hard hump. Homo, home. Well, interesting. Home and dome. Seems to be some sort of a cognate there. Maybe represents a shift from starting with 0 to starting with 1. This is maybe some of the sources of confusion in our culture. Makes our cult less sure than we would like it to be. Let's keep on here. Let's move on to B, the second letter of all of the alphabets here. Second digit of our fingers. The element that goes with this one is helium. Well, that's a real male kind of sounding element. Interestingly enough, helium is most famous for what happens when you swallow helium. And you start talking like this. Like a helium. It's an inert gas. Hydrogen is very reactive. If you have heard much about energy technology, you know that one of the ideas for generating unlimited energy is to try to somehow separate the hydrogen from water and burn hydrogen, because it is one of the most flammable substances there is. It reacts with almost anything very violently. Good way to generate energy. Good way to blow yourself up too, as we know. from our experience with the hydrogen bomb. Helium is an inert gas. It doesn't react with anything very easily, and makes good balloons for that reason. A helium balloon is much less flammable than a hydrogen balloon, as folks discovered when they started making these large balloons, the Zeppelins of World War I. Those things were extremely flammable because they couldn't get enough helium to fill them with helium, so they filled them with hydrogen. What can we think that starts with B or he? Ball, balloon. Well, we were just talking about balloons, weren't we? Interesting that all goes with helium and B. Baal or Baal is the goat god. Beelzebub, the dark god of satanic cults. Balaam, Bedlam. A word maybe is not familiar to you, but that's an old word for an insane asylum. Bethlehem, badge, badger, which made me think of bad girl, or bad German, which there were a lot of bad girls, had Germans back in World War II. Some of them working as actresses in Hollywood, doing spy work for Nazi Germany. Bible, or maybe that's supposed to be Babel. Interesting how Bible and Babel have so much in common. Bipolar, biology, biography, Bye. Helios, another name for the sun god. Hephaestus, the original name of the smith god, the volcano god. Hercules. This is an interesting thing that maybe people don't know. Hercules, you've probably heard of Hercules, the strong man who did the 12 labors to earn divinity, although he was only half man, was actually the favorite of Hera, the wife of Zeus. Hercules, her hero, and wasn't a real popular guy with the king of the gods, who thought he was kind of a brutish, not very nice person. One of the famous stories of Hercules is how he died, in fact, and at least his body died, because his wife got to resenting his behavior. Don't know the exact details, there's probably several different versions of it, but decided that she was going to give him this wonderful cloak as a present. It turned out this cloak was enchanted with a poison that destroyed his body, burned his body away, and that's how he became a god instead of a half-human. You got to be careful who you marry these days. Hermes, the other god of the Greek pantheon that ties together with the he theme. Again, Hermes, which, interestingly enough, in many cultures, Hermes is a hermaphroditic god, has both male and female parts. Hermes. Interesting. Healing, hero. Bring in the row character, which is a very important one to many stories. Hide, hidden, oxhide. Let's see. Where are we going to go with next? Let's go to C. The third element is lithium. most people are somewhat familiar with lithium these days because that is the main ingredient to batteries. At least the current battery technology is mostly lithium based. And lithium is a very, very, very dangerous thing to produce. It requires mining, it requires strip mining, it requires very dirty processes to extract it from the rock that it's found. And the only reason lithium batteries are considered green technology is because all the damage is done in the country that produces the lithium batteries, China. They pay the price for all the numby-gumbies in the West to think they're being green. I'm gonna go get a Tesla so I don't burn carbon. Oh, there's one born every day. Seven-tone scale, fa. What are they? Father, faith, fear, flower, flow, fluoride. Fe is iron, ferrous, ferocious. That's one of those interesting elements that its sign doesn't match what it sounds like. The other interesting thing about lithium is that you'll notice there's cats like Lilith, Livy, Liver, Oliver. I think that's going to be a very special name. It has been for a number of reasons. I named my firstborn son Oliver. Livermore, Larry, Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. My dad worked on nuclear chemistry for many years. Cobalt, Cain, Karma, Kali, Chiron. Cairo. Well, that's interesting. Cairo. Where did that name come from, and why does it sound so much like Chiron? For those of you not familiar with Chiron, this is a centaur, we're told, half man, half horse, which should have been a centhippus in that case. Instead of a centaur, centaur sounds like a 10-fingered bull. To me, more like a minotaur. Who supposedly, the story of Chiron links with Hercules. As it is told, Chiron was the mentor of Hercules, who taught him not to be such a beast, who raised him to not only be, strong man, but also a leader, a promoter of culture, more cultured person, which also sort of matches the template of the myth of Gilgamesh and Enkidu in many, many respects. Only who's the beast and who's the teacher, who's the taught, who's the beast, who's the king? Questions come to mind. Christ starts with C. Charity. Where else do we want to go here? Well, there's other elements that start with a C sound. It's interesting that we have multiple C sounds, don't we? We have the C and the K. Why have two? And why not have another one that's the CH sound instead of having to have a CH? Maybe we're missing a letter there. Some alphabets have it, some don't. K we'll talk about later. Krypton. Interesting. That's an interesting element. For those of you that follow the Superman series, know something about Krypton, but you bet you didn't know that it actually is a real element. Calcium, Californium, Colorado, California. Cyclops, color. Cyan, cyanide. A lot of interesting things start with C. one of the things I wanted to point out in this session is just how much you can get from word associations, from free association on a theme, which is an illustration why what we consider intelligence, what we consider artificial intelligence, is not nearly as intelligent as it pretends to be. If you think today's AIs are intelligent, it's probably because you are dumb. And I say that in all kindness, but you are dumb. You have lived in a culture which has progressively dumbed people down for 100 years to make them better consumers, to make them more tractable to the folks of power who want to run this world. This is a purposeful agenda. They want to make you into slaves. They don't want smart slaves. Smart slaves rebel. Smart slaves run away. Smart slaves slack off. And they're making you dumb. And that's why you think these AIs are smart, because you are so dumb. If the only resource you've ever used to do a bit of research is Wikipedia, you are dumb. Wikipedia is so biased, so unfact-checked, so much a work of the democracy of truth, it's a joke. There are glaring falsehoods in Wikipedia that nobody addresses because nobody can touch. And if you touch it, you're going to be labeled a racist or a sexist or a whatever that's out of fashion right now. And this ties in with the theme that I talk about a lot, which is cult Marxism. This is a progression, something that those in power have always tried to do, to instill people with blind faith in a cult of power worship that replaces any real sense of responsibility among the power or among the people. You don't have to worry about morality. Your culture defines morality for you on a daily basis and spits it out to you on the TV in the form of the latest miniseries or the latest nightly news on your favorite corporate media source: MSNBC, CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC, PBS. It's all programming. It's all cult Marxism. They are programming you to be stupid, to not check facts, to not compare truths. They want to just spoon feed the truth to you every day like little baby children. Good, good, good. Have another mini-series. Oh, what a nice little child. Okay, moving on. I'm going to try to move a little more quickly now. D. Beryllium is the fourth element. I was going to get into some of the properties of these elements, but I think I'm not going to get into. See, this is interesting. C is G in Greek and Hebrew. That's an interesting shift in alphabets. There's probably something very important about that. Now, what's interesting too is that shift C to G. C to G. G is Sol in the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Maybe at one point G was the starting note. G was the perfect scale. G for God. G going with Sol, sun worship. C going with cult or dominus, Lord worship. Might be a way to view that shift in emphasis that went with turning C into G, or turning G into C, as the case may be. I guess turning G into C because our English alphabet is newer, I believe, than the Greek or the Hebrew. D. What words start with D? Deus. Means God in Latin. Deus Pater, Jupiter. God the Father. Dis is a old god. That was the god of hell. Hades is a connection between the dis and the Hades. Death, disaster, Darth Vader, dark matter, dark night, dynamite. Ties into elements later on that we'll talk about. Nitroglycerin, Dan, the tribe of Dan, Danville, Diablo, Spanish word for devil, Diabloque, God, the A-bloke, maybe. Maybe the devil is God. Maybe God is the devil. Devil's in the details. Interestingly enough, my dad and his family had a little walnut farm in Danville, California, right next to Mount Diablo. In fact, my dad went to Mount Diablo schools. Devil, Deva. Many people aren't aware that a Deva was a lesser spiritual deity, female. Devil was a lesser deity, male. Both were considered types of jinn, which is a D word I didn't mention here, but is familiar to those who know the 1001 Arabian Nights stories and who know very much about the Islamic faith. The Quran talks a lot about jinn. Diva, Deva, Diva. We all know a few divas, I'm sure. David, the famous shepherd who became a king. Other words for the dark side, Tartarus. In fact, many languages, the D and the T sound are pretty much identical. Some languages don't even have a separate letter for them. They're so similar. Tartarus, Tarzan, terror, terrible, night, nitro. Dubnium. I put that in there for some reason. I'm not sure what the property of dubnium that tied in well. And there's things for you to go research here, which I think was the whole point. Is something somewhere in all this nonsense that I'm spouting today, you're going to find something that hits a synchronicity for you. Something you're gonna want. Wow, I'm curious about that. I'm going to go investigate, and it will send you down a rabbit hole. And this is how we wake up. This is how we become more conscious. This is why consciousness is not a one-size-fits-all thing. Everybody develops a unique individual consciousness. There is no one consciousness that we're all going to go back to. Oh, I want to go back to source. I'm tired of being alive. Bullshit. You're tired of taking responsibility for your life, your incarnation. I'm sorry. You picked it. You live with it. E, epsilon. Interestingly enough, in Hebrew, this is the H of Yahweh. Boron. What a boring element. Oh, this is the A in here. In this particular numbering scheme, What starts with E? Easter, Esther, Enoch, Ezekiel, Elijah, Eros, Epimetheus, Eve, Egg, Ishnu, Vishnu. Maybe a tie-in there. Venus, Enos. Maybe Venus is somehow related to Enoch. Vulcan, volcano, vagina, Valentinian, estrogen, ether, Eoba. Lots of things come to mind. The very feminine letter in many ways, kind of like lithium. Let's scroll down a little bit here. Bear with me. I swear we're going to move faster now. I could have gone on for days and days and days just following all the rabbit holes that I was finding, and I'm still, got half a dozen things I need to go back and research as a result of just thinking about this in this way. And I'm hoping that's what it will stimulate for you. Or maybe you'll think of another table you want to put in here. You want to somehow map another language in, or you want to map, well, what would be the case if, we were dinosaur 3 fingers? What's the 6-finger system? What's the 16 finger system? Assuming that spiders get 2 digits, or 4-legged creatures have 4 digits. It's possible. Evolution could do that. F, carbon. That's a very important mineral, isn't it? Carbone. Car, good. No, cars are bad. Carbone. Carbone comes from bones and make our cars run. Karma. Karma? She created cars? Oh, what a bitch. This is a lot of fun. I hope you are realizing that you can become quite a comedian, quite a devilishly clever comedian, by performing exercises like this to open up your mind. This is a mind expansion session here, in case you haven't noticed. Maybe you've already tuned out because you don't want to notice. This guy is too weird. Oh, he makes I want to tune out. Okay, this is your programming talking to you, telling you you're uncomfortable, and our culture tells us, oh, well, if you're uncomfortable, you need to disconnect. Oh, get away from the bad guys. They're saying things that hurt you. Be a wise monkey. Hear no evil. See no evil. Speak no evil. Breathe no more. Nitrogen. We've already talked a bit about nitrogen, so we'll leave that one alone. H. Element 8, oxygen. That's a very important one. What else starts with O? Operation, open, hour, hope, opus dei. Ouroboros, the snake that goes around and eats its tail. Ophiuchus. It's not part of the zodiac, but as a constellation, that is a snake. Om. My God, I need a better mantra. Omen. Odysseus. Oliver, as we mentioned before. I. Fluorine. What else starts with I? Indium, iodine, 2 other elements that have interesting properties. Isis, isotope. Or, in the F vein, flood, false flag. Interesting Fs. Element. 15. Neon. Or actually, it would be 14, I guess, because we're counting from 0. Neon, that's another one of those inert gases. Neo, new, network. Or the letter J, Yah, Judah, Jew, Jehovah. Other ways of saying yes. K, sodium. Lithium, slightly less here. If you don't know, sodium chloride is salt, which they tell us having too much salt is bad for us. What they don't tell you is having too little salt is just as bad, if not worse, because if you had too little salt, there would be no way for your nervous system to send electrical impulses to control your body. Interesting tidbit. Dual-use technologies is another theme that you need to think about. Bad. There is nothing that's completely good. There are things that have consequences. And we need to deal with those consequences. A bad person sometimes needs to be put in jail. Maybe needs to be deprived of their life. If you can't afford to keep them in jail for the rest of their life, or if they are corrupting the other people they run into in jail. That is an example of a very difficult karmic decision. It's hard to tell what is tyranny and what is abuse. What is actually for the common good. Good is not that common, not that easy to discern. Let's just hit a few high points from here. We mentioned illuminating. Interesting. That's a very alchemical element, isn't it? Silicon, very well known for Silicon Valley. This is basically sand. Silicate crystals are sand. That's what your chips are basically made of. Mostly layers of sand. So like I said, this was a serious god for sandwich chips. SI also being the beginning of Sirius, a very interesting star system that's part of our lore. They call the Dog Star. I thought it was interesting that phosphorus, which is known for being very good to make grenades with, or flares, comes so close to pyro. These are like the pyromaniac elements. Sulfur, another element that has a lot of downsides. Sulfur in the air creates sulfur rain, which is basically sulfuric acid, which can ultimately help plants, can make the soil very fertile, but it can also cause a lot of health problems in a large dose. High-strength sulfuric acid can cut through a lot of things. Chlorine is another dual-use element. We can purify water with chlorine, a little bit of chlorine, but a lot of chlorine can create chlorine gas, which is a good way to, well, go open a bottle of bleach and sniff it and see how your lungs fare in the process. And then we're back to another of the noble gases, the ones that don't interact with any. Argon. Titanium, tungsten's little sister. Vanadium. There's some interesting stuff here that if you look at the patterns and look at what correlates with what, I think you're going to find some interesting linkages between the different alphabets and the different numbers of fingers and the different elements and the representation versus the name. This is, in fact, all basically clues to discover our cultural history. How did that come about? These kind of questions can haunt you for an entire career. And this is why so many people who have studied philosophy, the deepest philosophy, which is always leads back to an understanding of symbolism, an understanding of the rationale, why does mathematics work, and how is it tied to the real world, or the unreal world as it is, since we know that what we observe is not really that real. In fact, this solid body you see before you is 99.9% nothing. Just your impression of the field generated by this particular collection of atoms, which is a representation of a particular collection of souls of different consciousness, which is the fundamental basis for everything I teach you, which is the truth. And you can see from this introduction to creation, to naming, to becoming, you couldn't name any of these things without an alphabet. You could not describe them. You could not talk about them. You couldn't talk about relationships between them without language. You could be the most powerful spiritual being in the universe. And if you didn't know how to talk, you didn't have a language, you didn't have a culture, all you could do is radiate energy. I like you, I don't like you, I have complex feelings toward you. That's how souls got along with each other before, and it wasn't very effective. That's why creation happened, for communication, to give souls a way to play together, ever more fun and interesting games. This is why I refer to creation sometimes as the game of souls. It has rules. Those rules are sometimes obeyed in some universes. Those are physical universes. They obey the rules of physics and chemistry. Other universes, the spiritual universes, the rules are maybe just guidelines, maybe don't exist at all. They exist if you want them to exist. You can manifest as anything you want in the spiritual realms, if it's allowed by the God of that spiritual universe. That's why people's afterlife experiences are different. Some people have an afterlife experience. I went to heaven, I saw Jesus, or I saw God, I saw Allah. All the angels were around me, Saint Michael and Mother Mary and blah, blah, blah. Okay, this happens. Belief makes it so. Ideas that have enough use to enough souls become God ideas, goddess ideas. They help train souls to be better players at some aspect of this big game that is the multiverse. It's a game, it's not reality. Reality was what there was before the multiverse, is basically just a universe of pure thought. Nothing material, nothing named, nothing defined. Ideas without shape or form. You can't get very far with such ideas. But all you can do is get to the point of wanting to have some sense of togetherness or apartness. This is why God would create other souls for company. And what kind of company do you want? Well, some people say, well, I want to meet somebody just like me. That would be perfect. And there's others who would like, oh God, I couldn't stand to be living with somebody like me. I've got to have somebody that complements me. How many times have you seen those patterns in relationships? This is normal. the only soul that doesn't need a complement is no soul. Even God wanted company. If God was perfect, if God was everything, if God was the God many of you think he is, nothing would have been created. God wouldn't need anything. God wouldn't want anything. So, God created company. Maybe he created some company that was like him. And, gee, that's not much fun. We all have the same ideas. We're always playing the same games. We get bored with each other. Let's create something different. Let's create an anti-God. Somebody that's going to disagree with me. Take the opposite position. Be the devil's advocate. That kind of person will drive you crazy, but they can be fun to play with for a while. And those of you who have a tendency to get into short-term relationships that end quickly but are very passionate know exactly what I'm talking about. And some people live for that. That's all they want, is that sense of adventure, of the unknown, of challenge in another soul that helps them to feel more alive. Others like a more calm, settled existence of an echo chamber where, we grow old together, thinking the same things, discussing things till we agree, or we agree not to discuss something. This perfectly synergistic relationship that lasts forever. Some people are perfectly happy with that. Most people will get tired of that. Eventually they will find that what they share together isn't enough to satisfy all their needs. And that's when couples start thinking about getting out of a marriage. The 7-year itch, they call it, in fact. On the average, that kind of desire for something different hits after about 7 years, funny enough. Special number, isn't it, in human experience? Anyway, I think I've covered what I wanted to cover here. I encourage you, if you find this interesting, you want to continue on this, you want to take this spreadsheet as a starting point, drop me a line. I'll send you the Google Doc link, and come up with your own version. Come up with a new version. If you have some interesting information to add, discuss, let me know, and we'll do a duo show. This is where it's at, folks. This is how we're going to solve this problem that we have as a species. We're not going to solve the problem by shutting down or shutting up everybody that disagrees with us, who has an idea which is uncomfortable, who has an idea that belongs to a different faith than ours, a different belief system. We're going to move forward by discussing them. The people that are going to survive whatever's coming for humanity are going to be the people who can do that, who can bridge gaps, not force everybody to follow their way. Force creates counterforce. Okay? This is physics. This is the physics of karma as well. If you do bad unto somebody else, they're going to want to do bad back to you. Now, it doesn't necessarily follow if you do good to somebody, they're going to give you good back. That would be nice, but that's the honor system. Karma doesn't work that way. Sometimes you don't get recompense in the way that you think. If somebody hurts you, your recompense may be that it gives you a new opportunity somewhere else that, oh, geez, something good happened. This is one of the Buddhist stories I love. I don't know the details of it. You can look it up, but basically it's a story of a man who goes through life. Something good happens that causes something bad to happen, but then something good happens, and then something bad happens, and it's like the series of juxtapositions of what's good and what's bad. Good leads to bad, bad leads to good, is kind of the Taoist view, the Taoist symbol the yin-yang symbol. What it misses out is that you learn something in each cycle between good and bad. You're not the same person, or at least you don't have to be the same person. You don't have to react the same way to a similar situation. You can choose to do something different. And this is how we grow. This is how we evolve. This is how languages evolve. A language runs out of gas with certain things. Or somebody's using the language different, and gosh, I like the way they're using it. Maybe 2 or 3 different cultures are using a language a little bit differently, and we want to encompass them all. This is why English is the best language invented thus far by our species. It is the most flexible. It has encompassed the most different influences. You look at any other language in the last 100 years, and virtually every change to that language has come from new language generated by English. It is the language of our species. It is the language of our future. And this is another thing you'll get from watching that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's the best cultural language yet developed. Evidence? Shakespeare. Evidence? Monty Python. Evidence? Charles Dickens. Evidence? It goes on and on and on. Now, there are great works in other languages. Some that you can't appreciate quite so well in translation. That doesn't mean that all the other languages go away and we only ever speak English. English is the common language. If somebody's been telling you, well, no, you don't learn English, you need to learn Mandarin now, they are an idiot. You can't use Mandarin without knowing English. Why? Because the only way that you can type Mandarin into a computer is with pinyin, which is using Western characters. That's what they're doing, because Mandarin is a pictographic language. It's like hieroglyphics. There are literally 3,000 very distinct characters in Mandarin, and that's in simplified Chinese. Traditional Chinese has God knows how many characters. This is not the language of the future. I'm sorry, people. Anybody who thinks that is stupid, is following a cult Marxist narrative. The world is not going to be a Chinese world. China will be a very important part of the world. But for the world to continue, we cannot let China conquer it. We never did, we never will. China tried to conquer the world. Their culture is not suitable to be a world culture. Anyway, anyhow, the things that they invented were dual-use technologies that are not useful. Confucianism is a fake. It's basically the ultimate worship of meritocracy. A group of elite who think they know everything, who control everything, who want to dictate everything. This is how the Chinese Empire, no matter what dynasty it was ruled throughout history. And they kept getting destroyed because they were brittle. They were top-heavy. The people didn't like to be dictated to, so they would do everything on the side. There was always a huge black market in China, and there still is. People that just do their own thing because they don't want anything to do with the Chinese Communist Party. And that's the whole reason that China, the Chinese Communist Party, has wanted to have all of this dystopian authoritarian technology from big tech. They're trying to figure out some way that they can overcome the Chinese people's natural tendency to do this to their government, because that's basically how Chinese have survived so long. They survived in spite of their emperors, in spite of their governments, in spite of their Confucian numby-gumby overlords. Eastern philosophy has good ideas. It has things worthy of discussion, but it will not rule the world. Eastern philosophy breeds communal organization, top-down, brittle organization. It breeds fake meritocracy. Now, the West has had its fake meritocracies too, but it's come through Eastern influence. Christianity replaced Islam. Christianity came from the East. It came from Buddhist influences. It is a cult of easy spirituality. Oh, you just have to believe in Jesus and he'll die for your sins. You can be forgiven for anything as long as you come to Jesus. This is a cult mentality. It is spiritual bypassing. Now it can be useful. It's a good halfway house to recover from a really bad spot, to think that, well, somebody's going to give me a second chance if I just work at it. And that's the way most Christian aid groups work. It's the same with the Muslim world. Really no different. There is good in each religion, but you've got to beware of the dark side. And the dark side comes from Eastern religions, Eastern cults of one. When you think of things in terms of absolutes, one perfection, nirvana, source consciousness, Christ consciousness, we're all one. We're all God having little individual experiences, masturbation fantasies, so God can learn more about himself. This is nonsense. This is insanity. It's delusional insanity. It is demonstrably inconsistent with scientific laws, scientific principles, logical principles. And if that bothers you, I'm glad, because I'm trying to get people bothered enough to realize how stupid they are before they self-destruct. And that's exactly where this species is headed if we continue to be broken up into little tribes of cult Marxist elitism. Our one is better than their one. Our one is the best one. We must all be one or we'll be none. That's not going to work. You try to unite the whole world together and you're going to get it destroyed, but quick. You'll end up with some dystopian, centralized rule, Orwellian rule that tells everybody what they should think, when they should think, and shocks them every time they don't think that or don't do what they want. That's not heaven, folks. I'm sorry. That's hell. That's the anti-God side. And if you want Antichrist to win the battle, that's what you're going for. And anybody who understands what Christ is all about, what God is all about, what Allah is all about, what karma is all about, is going to oppose you tooth and nail. Because we like our freedom. We like our individuality. We like our independence. We like to be able to make decisions about what is the responsible way to use our freedoms. We like to be able to negotiate boundaries with other souls. Compromise. Work together when we can. Avoid the souls we don't want to be around at our discretion. We like to have that free choice. Now, granted, there are going to be times where we don't have much choice, where there's too few resources to go around. There's too many people fighting for the same breath of air or glass of water, patch of land. And that's something we have to deal with. We don't deal with it as one. We deal with it as many. We deal with it as locally as possible, not by making a one-size-fits-all, top-down decision from Brussels or Beijing or Washington, D.C. that doesn't make any flipping sense to somebody in Fiji or somebody in South America or somebody in, up near the North Pole, Siberia. This is insane. We are doing insane things right now as a species, and we just need to stop it. If you're going to be insane, let us put you in an asylum and get you some treatment. Okay? The lunatics are running the asylum right now. We've got the sanest people in the world who actually understand more about what's going on, being told they're insane because they have multiple personalities. They're schizophrenic. They're bipolar. These people are all more sane than you folks who...
I know the truth. I know the one. It is this. It is this. Don't look this way. Don't look that way. Anybody challenges me.
At any rate, that's my message for the day. If you like it, like, share, subscribe. Do whatever you want with it. I hope you have found it at least somewhat enlightening. Open a few new questions for you. Maybe wanted you to read a book for a change. Do a little research on something that you may have been uncertain about, and I called into question. Whatever. Till next time, this is the Omnist Hour with Rob Tromp, and happy karma.